Welcome back. It has been a little while, but we're finally doing it again. It is the double swing with myself and Yumi. The last time we did this, it was the RMRB for the BGL Copenhagen Major, and now we're actually at the real major, so to speak. The opening stage still feels a little bit as a bit of a gimmick, but it's a gimmick that's appreciated in terms of investing funds into those little teams who don't quite make it that deep. It's a nice little bonus for them, and for a lot of them, it's their entire budget for the year. Cough, Greyhound. Which for some reason they can't save any of. So we just have a brief little look at the points, I think, before we get into the next set of picks. Last RMRB picks, I got 2 points, you got 2 points, Yumi, and so did the viewers. So not much changed in terms of the gaps between people. Yumi and I are still right at the back, and the viewers are in the lead because they've got it easy. But yeah, Yumi, it's been a little bit. How have you been doing?
Yeah, I mean, been good. I mean, we covered A and B within the RMRs, but then Asian Americas came up, and I was at that event instead, and so we don't actually get to sort of that would have been our way to skill diff the viewers probably because I'd like to think I have a bit more insight into what's going on there. I don't
Yeah.
imagine loads of them are keeping in touch with like the Americas region or Asia really, so. And there's been some nice teams that came out of those regions, though I think some of them are probably going to end up in 0-3 when we actually get to the main major stage, unfortunately.
Yeah, probably going to be the case, but it's nice. It's a nice little story, and I agree. If there had been a pick'em or a video for about the Asia Armor, for example, I know the viewers, for a fair few of them, may have picked Greyhound, which is something I would never do on principle because they're just Americans, but Southern Hemisphere to me, so they could never pick them in good conscience. So we'd have ended up with a bit of a point, I think, regathering session, even though there's not many points for us to have really fought over. Like, there's 2 picks to make, if that. But anyway, let's start off this episode. You had first pick, and you've gone with a favourite that I wasn't really expecting.
Yeah, I went with actually can't remember which one I picked first, but I do know that I have Eternal Fire as one of my first picks out of the favorites, and they're a team that weirdly are playing. I mean, they're playing the best version of the Counter Strike that we've actually seen out of the Turkish rosters so far this year. I think they've been a real surprise to me because there was a real period for Eternal Fire where they're just constantly shifting in-game leaders, and then they finally settle in with Major, and then Wicadia comes in, and Wicadia looks good at his first event, I think at ESL Pro League, and then they still had a few like minor stumbles after that event where all the talk about him always making the right decisions and always looking comfortable in his spots, never nervous or anxious about what he's doing. It did seem like that narrative sort of tapered away, but the more we've seen them compete and more the chances we've seen them at lands, they have gotten better and better. And I feel like right now, even though I wouldn't, if you look at the fantasy picks, for example, the 2 gold players are Woxicans and Tars, and I do think they're maybe not going to put up those kinds of like star level performances, but I think as a team right now, Eternal Fire feels so cohesive that it's kind of I actually have them going kind of 3-0 in this bracket. I think they're going to have a pretty much flawless run in this opening sector.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because when the team kept shifting things around, it was just, for crying out loud, settle on an IGL, and preferably not one who's AWPing. That was it in my head. It's like if you just had Major in, just figured out the 5th piece, I guess it would have been, and just stayed steady, we'd have arrived at this point a long time ago. I don't think they needed to fiddle around for so long. But no, they finally done it. They're playing good Counter-Strike. Wicadia has been a revelation, really, because on the Academy sides, I mean, it was tough to figure out much from the Eternal Fire Academy because they played such loose, chaotic nonsense, constantly shifting players around. And there's a couple guys you'd think, oh, they look talented, but nothing they do make sense because this whole team's kind of up in just chaos land, really. But the fact that they've managed to salvage one of those players, turn him into a solid piece, who does have the occasional pop-off map, like he takes a lot of opening fights and he can really go off at times. He's not as explosive as he maybe first looked, but definitely a valuable addition and a valuable piece. So I think Eternal Fire is a good choice. But their opening matchup. Their opening matchup is against someone I've personally put in a 3-0, but I'm not going to talk about that until I get to them because I have picked them obviously later on. But Eternal Fire, yeah, it's going to be an interesting decision. If they do win that opening BO1 and the other matches, just the favourite wins, I guess, I think they probably do go 0-3. 3-0, sorry. I do see that being quite likely. So Eternal Fire, a good pick, but just one I wasn't expecting first off, considering who's available.
Yeah, I think that the problem with this opening stage is it is actually going to be quite a brawl, even for the teams that are considered favorites. You know, there's a lot of like asterisks next to their logos as to reasons why they wouldn't perform. You know, there's and some of them I'm sure we'll talk over later on in the show. But you know, like newer rosters, in-game leaderships, sometimes role problems on some of these teams that are favorited. And the two favorites I've gone with, and the one that you know in Eternal Fire, those teams feel like they've got the roles ironed out, they have an identity, and I think they're gonna use that to sort of make it out of this stage no problem.
Okay. Well, the team I've picked, the biggest weakness I can think of is they're too damn good and too obvious a pick to go through. So that's Heroic, who are, honestly, pretty good. Like, they're just a good team. They shouldn't be in this stage, even if you think about it. Like, in terms of the top 16 teams in the world, the idea that Heroic isn't one of them feels a bit strange to me. I think the one thing holding a lot of people back from picking this roster is that we haven't seen them make a deep run yet, I guess, even though they've only barely existed 3 months. And Nikodos takes a lot of shit. That's pretty much it. People think Nikodos a bit inconsistent, streaky, unproven, not the greatest AWPer. I tend to disagree with the fact that he's not good enough for this team, as is often intimated. I think he's plenty good enough on a tier 1 side. Sure, he's going to have his off maps, but I think he's plenty good enough. I like this roster. I think they've got a good leadership core. That IGL coach duo, which has always been a critical part of tier 1 teams, they have it nailed down. Even if Kixan, you know, at times I think it does come up too much. The Kixan is a good IGL. Like, I don't think he's that good. I don't think he's reached the level of even like the top half of IGLs, if you think about the top 16 where they really belong. But he's good enough, and Saul's a great coach. They have great pieces around him who can all think for themselves and make the right plays without needing micromanagement. I think it's a really solid roster. There's no reason why they shouldn't go through, but this is a major, so it sometimes feels like a coin flip, right? Even with favourites over the last few years.
Yeah, Heroic are in a weird place with me because I do have a lot of respect for Saul on this roster, just as like a coach that can provide a little bit more tactical insight. I think it was something that's even quoted in some of the previous like ENCE games that they'd say, oh, during a timeout, that was just like actually Saul's call that we went for. And I think it is, yeah, I think I was watching, God, I think it was Snakes and Banter. I think it's Snakes and Banter, and they were kind of talking about the idea that you know Saul might just be one of the most underappreciated coaches within the circuit at the moment, and I can kind of back that to a certain degree, just in terms of like if I'm in a critical game at like a pivotal moment and I need a call, I actually do think that Saul could probably maybe provide that. I do kind of agree that Kixon is kind of a he's an in-game leader that won't make your team worse when you add him into your roster, but I don't think he's going to make it significantly better either. He'll sort of maintain the level that you're kind of expected in that role. And I do think that these guys have enough potential, but I don't know. Like I've seen them have a couple of shaky performances, like the Dallas European close qualifiers. Like they did actually, I mean, they beat Prezi and they beat ENCE, but they weren't exactly very convincing wins to me. And in my opinion, I think you know Nertz as a sort of a valued piece and sort of touted as a star rifler entering this roster does feel like he's on a I wouldn't say fraud watch, but I'm watching him particularly because I felt it almost feels like those numbers were inflated by the calling that Snappy did around him as a rifler, as opposed to him just being able to sort of like outduel and outmechanics everybody on this heroic roster, which is weird because I think when I was watching him on ENCE, it almost felt like Nertz was taking a lot of dominion by himself and you know won quite a lot of rounds by himself, but it almost feels like he doesn't have that same fluidity on this heroic core yet. And I've been weirdly more impressed with like I think Shush and you know maybe even Tessa's to a certain degree in terms of you know winning games and having these high impact rounds for heroic so far.
I do think you're right on the Nertz front. Not so much because I don't think he isn't a good enough like number one rifler, but more on the idea that I think a lot of people have overrated him. He's another player where he's got a lot of credit, and I've not really seen like I've seen I think it's Kassad say he'd outright thinks Nertz is a top 5 player right now. Like he's intimated top 5. He's definitely said he's better than Frozen. And I'm sat there like I don't have enough evidence to back that up. So I'm always a bit iffy on that going that far. But in terms of this stage, plenty good enough. The teams they're going to be playing, he's going to be the best player on the server almost every game. I've got no issues about that. And the final thing is, I just want to go back to the first point you were kind of touching on. There's a reason I'd like to judge IGLs and coaches, firstly as tandems, but also seeing what they do when they go with different rosters, different pairings. You can't just get credit for the one pairing that worked, cough glaive, and nothing else. Like, you got to do it over and over again with different players, different coaches, to show that you actually have this this level of value. You bring something, because to us as outsiders, how are we supposed to judge them otherwise? If we never get insight into the comms, even the brief glimpses we get from interviews can't always be completely, I think, considered scientific. Like, they're just little glimpses. They're not real insights. So I think it's important to really keep that in mind when you look at these things.
Also, nobody that's on your team is going to shit talk the in-game leader when you're still on that team with that in-game leader, or nobody's going to have
Typically,
a bad word to say. Yeah, it's like, oh, I don't like the way he calls, and it's like, guys, we're still playing with this man for like 6 more months. What do you mean you don't like the way he calls? Why are you saying that to everybody in the public?
Come on, guys, contracts are long. You can't say it now.
Yeah. And also, people are just too nice. Like, people are not willing to throw people under the bus when things are going wrong, unless you're sounding. No. Yeah, exactly. Or you sound in Yabia and you do it behind closed doors.
Yeah, that's when it's going to happen, isn't it? It's always the case. Whenever you hear about someone getting cut from a team, you only hear about it once it happens, and it's actually, we had 13 meetings and we didn't like this guy at all, and he cooked the pasta too much, like some silly crap. Then you're like, oh, what? We thought it was okay, whatever. We just give up, throw in the towel, just let them have their fun and move on and talk about the next roster, which is what we're going to do now. So who's your second favorite?
So yeah, this doesn't feel very like me. These don't feel like me teams to pick. But I've picked Saw. Kind of for similar reasons as Eternal Fire. It's strange because Saw to me always felt like they were on the precipice of making it to like a big event. But even if they got there, like with the earlier rosters, I always just thought they'd crumble and you wouldn't get good production out, or like even good calling really out of Muterus or any of the like the AWPing stars or rifling stars that he had around him. It feels like they've passed that hurdle and are just running with it right now. Like for them to have made the major in the first place was obviously a massive accomplishment for them. First Portuguese roster in the major circuit, and then also they're doing it with a cut of some of the new guard and the old guard. The For the Win roster was something that was kind of an ambitious project, but had beaten Saw domestically a number of times, and then they just took all the best pieces from that roster, added them to Saw, and got rid of all the players that were like way too inconsistent on that previous Saw core, and they've brought them in. And now from the RMRs to now, I think their blast showing was great as well. I don't know. I'm liking the Counter-Strike that's coming out of Seoul at the moment, and I feel like even in the rounds that look kind of half-witted or pretty poorly constructed, you still have like Roman pulling off some crazy play. You have Story finding an ult pick that makes it a doable circumstance again, and I like that they've got a dynamic like that. Like not even mentioning like Ujurks and Arsdosh, who are both players that can be very explosive for Seoul. They've got some nice components here, kind of akin to the Eternal Fire side. I feel like they've just hit that final hump, and now they're ready to punch some of these other teams in the face.
Yeah, it was weird for a while. When I saw them qualify for stuff, they were one of the teams where they'll come out of the Tier 2 circuit if they ever made it, And I thought, it's kind of a wasted slot. I'd rather someone else from Tier 2 got through because their individuals could hit harder. They get the better chance to actually go and make a run. But now they've settled into this core. They finally really hit their stride. And yeah, you're right. It's a combination of not having like a star like a Xantares, but having decent, solid like star players. The roles fit and good calling, and it's all merged. It's nice. It's cohesive CS, which a lot of teams can't say. And I think even though there's a bit of a dampener on their Blast showdown run where they beat OG, who didn't have Heavy God and his illness, they still beat Cloud9, they still beat Liquid, they still made it through to this stage of the major as well. There's a lot of things to be happy about. I think Saul's a good pick. I didn't expect you to go with two teams who are well, so outside of the tier 1 space. Like, neither one of these guys we've been watching as intently as we have my favorite picks for the last 3 months.
I've been burned too many times
You
by,
clearly have.
I've picked too many Cloud9s, so they've tainted the water for me.
They really have. And that's why my second pick, I think, makes perfect sense for me. It's ENCE. Sure, they're not going to play like they did at Katowice. We all knew that Katowice was a bit of a fairy story, and that wouldn't really repeat itself too often. But they're still playing good CS. Glaive is still calling a good game. I still think he should end up on Astralis, and we do that roster move everyone's simultaneously come up with. But they've got pieces that are making sense. The team has played at a higher level and on LAN consistently for the last 3 months. I don't see why I wouldn't pick them. I think Hades has been not so much a revelation. We all knew he had the talent, but the fact that he's been able to string it together so consistently, whilst also finding some more impact on T sides, which always was an issue for him, has been amazing. I think Diha has been adjusting well to a slightly more starring role than he was in the old ENCE lineup. Despite, a lot of time we did think maybe he can't do it. Maybe that's his limit, is that he can't actually be a true star rifler. I don't think he's quite there yet, but he's definitely taken steps in that direction. So I'm a big fan of this ENCE roster's level. I think they're good enough to make it through this bracket, and they got a lot of scrap, a lot of fight. They got a bit of an underdog mentality despite being a favourite in this field. So I think they've got a good chance to make it through, even if it is scrappy and ugly, unlike some of the other teams I've picked. So I don't know. I just don't see anyone else though in this field also being better consistently. That's one of the problems I have with all the other picks that could be favourites here. It's like no one else here really has the vibe. You mentioned Cloud9. That's the big one. They don't have the vibe.
Yeah, I will say I think Hades. I'd weirdly compare him to Holzerk in the way that he orbs. To me, it feels like you could be getting more out of Hades, and you almost want more out of Hades because there's so many rounds that I look at that are so constructed around the riflers that even Hades' AWP is so far away from the action so often that when rounds do break down, you just have I don't know, Hades basically lurking with his AWP because the pack is broken and he's nowhere near to even try and trade or even hunt for picks in the bomb site breaks. He is a good player at sort of recovering man deficits. I do find he always gets a kill that equalizes, or sometimes will even tip the scales in a very awkward sort of 30-second 2v2 or 3v3, for example. He can sort of pry bar his way in those sort of moments. But I almost want to see more out of him in early round engagements because I think for me, the key to success on this roster is actually Kylar. That guy finds entries. He finds a lot of kills in the mid round as well. And I think without him or Glaive sort of opening up bomb sites, sometimes the ENCE strategies just look like they fall so flat. There's no contingency plan past the opening sort of engagements. I do like this team. And I think role-wise, Hades, when he went to 9, for example, was still playing this kind of style. He wasn't a star. He was putting up some good numbers on the AWP. He wasn't missing. But it was actually kind of forefronted by Kylar and K and everybody else on the pack, and Hades was kind of round security. But I think if you want to prove to be a top level team, you can't have that be your only play style. Unfortunately, I feel you need that extra level on this ENCE roster because they have good skill, but I don't think they have championship winning capabilities. For this stage, I think it'll work. But yeah, I do worry because I think that they might just be content with making top 16 and that being it. I think if you're ENCE, you want to have higher prospects than that.
Honestly, I think that might just not be true though, because ENCE are a small budget org who have had essentially miracle run after miracle run in terms of finding talent, putting the right pieces together, making it work for so long, under the snappy saw combo. I think this might be just a return to who they should be. They're gonna eventually move on from Glaive because I don't think he stays in a mostly Polish roster for long. I do think they end up making a full Polish roster again, and then being a team that can scrape into the top 24, be at the majors, be profitable, because that's always something they talk about. That's something they like to be I think astute with, is we will be a real esports team who make money, not just some VC funded clown show. I think this might be their new standard. is try to make the top 16 of the major if you can. Otherwise, it was a good run. Did we reach the bottom line? Oh, we did. The numbers are green.
I just have to always. I just have to always hope that competitors have the ambition to actually win. Unfortunately, like that's
the players
what I
will.
want.
The players will, the coach will. You make staff hires on that basis, but you can't, as an org, just go, you know what? I'm going to start arbitrarily cussing people in the vague hope that my $30,000 I have to pay for buyouts can get me someone. I think it makes
like a
more
championship
sense.
level team. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's just like when you see Hades and Diha be, previously a part of ENCE when they were, sort of climbing to the top and actually, were one of these like playoff contender teams. This feels still like a down step from that roster. Obviously, that core now with Falcons didn't make the major, by the way. Unlucky. But for me, when I see a team like that get deconstructed and those pieces can hang at that sort of level, if they're not able to sort of get back to that level, it's always a disappointment to me. So
Yeah.
it's the reason I didn't like fight you over ENCE is I actually don't even have them going through this stage because I almost feel like that is the hard part's been done. They made the major, they get their stickers, they get their cash injection as an organization. And I worry that the ambition is not going to be there in the same way that it was for Katowice, being so Polish motivated at that event.
Well, I'm sure. Well, we're going to discuss their opening matchup pretty much immediately because, well, you have them picked. But I thought we'd just, before we touch on the underdogs, talk about some of the other favourites we didn't want to talk about in terms of making the pick. I think the first most important one has to be Cloud9. We talked about them, just little sprinklings of takes in there, but overall, let's surmise this. Why have you not picked Cloud9 as either one of your picks? Because they are far more established than the two teams you've gone with.
I'm bored. Like, can Groove leave or somebody come in as like an analytical coach or something that actually sort of takes over practices and understands like how the team is going to shape up? Get an AWPer. Like there are so many AWPers in the Russian scene. I find it so hard to believe that they couldn't have picked somebody. Like it feels weird to think that this almost feels like a nepotistic roster that is so built on like the reputations of old. Like Boomich was not going to be a pick for me. He's been good. He's honestly been fine. He's been solid on rifles. But Electronic probably should be in-game leading. They should have a proper AWPer. You shouldn't have Hobbit and Boomich swapping sometimes depending on maps. I just like this team is not going to win a tournament. They might make it out of this stage fine, but they're never gonna they're just never gonna win a tournament with this roster. And it feels like I was so high on these guys when they were coming up in the online era, and like Shiro and AMKAL. That's just so disappointing now, just watching this unfold, especially when you've got so many elite level capable players on the roster. Like Hobbit's been sick, AMKAL was sick, Electronic and Perfecto need no introduction. Like why doesn't this work? And it's because it feels like there's like no actual philosophy behind how Cloud9 play, even though they are playing much more tactical Counter-Strike than they were when they were under Nafany. But I think that's the culture that's sort of almost been brought over from Na'Vi with Perfecto and Electronic. Like those guys have shifted the way that people interact with each other in the game, and maybe that's why you see like players like AMKAL struggle, because I don't think that's ever how he actually wanted to play. Like I think AMKAL liked the chaos and taking dry fights and doing all that nonsense because that's how he got a lot of his kills.
Yeah, it might be, but it is Boomich calling in this roster. I'm pretty sure I checked. Wikipedia has him listed as calling, and I'm pretty sure I read something. But more importantly, this team's a simple fix. It's the easiest fix in the world. Just cut AMKAL, bring an AWPer in. I don't care. I've had pushback. People say, "What about Hobbit?" I want Hobbit playing a role on a team more than I want AMKAL right now. But in either case, you cut that guy, you bring in an AWPer, and there's so many choices. Hell, they could have had these AWPers in like January, in February, before half of them qualified for the major. They could have picked one up. And then there's still more that are just lying about. There's Deco still in Aurora. Dexter's still on a bench somewhere. There's still a lot of players you could have picked up, even though some of the more exciting ones did make it to the major. So I think Cloud9, simple fix. You just cut that player, bring someone else in. I agree with you that they're not going to win championships. It is a bit odd, because here we're not picking championship winners, are we? But I just don't see them having, like, going into any game and going, they're definitely going to win it. That one they're going to win. because of that lack of AWP. I think the AWP plays such an important role. Counter-Strike always has and always will, and you can't just go into matchups without it and expect to be, guaranteed a win, because you have this big deficiency that the other team just won't have. So you kind of have to rely on these, some of them kind of washed up riflers who aren't really at their peak, winning you games, and that's a big thing to bet on. Yeah, go for it.
So I'd like to just clarify. I meant like Electronic should have never called. I feel like Hobbit as well should have probably never called.
Yeah.
Like, and I actually don't even. The thing is, people rate Boomich quite highly as an in-game leader. Weirdly, I don't even think that's like there were legitimate concerns about Na'Vi when Boomich was in-game leading them, that they basically didn't have like proper in-game leadership, and when they had to start working with Boomich as like a tactical coach, bro, he's like, not when you're an in-game leader under Blade, you're not an in-game leader in the conventional sense of the word. Like, that guy is giving you major preparations ahead of the game, and he's giving you flow charts and all sorts. I don't think he's like a real in-game leader. Like, he's someone that will follow a rehearsed game plan to a T. I think he can execute on that. But I just don't know that there's like that preparation happening behind the scenes for Cloud9. Like, I see no evidence to support that they have that level of insight into their game, and so they're always going to be even capped at the leadership level with whoever they pick up on this roster. Like, they need a tactical coach, or they need somebody that actually is like proven to be a proper in-game leader independently of a coach.
No, that's fair. For me, the Boomich edition was more of a positive because it, most importantly, got Hobbit Electronic off the IGL ship.
Yeah.
Like, that was a necessary addition to bring someone else, even as just a puppet, just to have someone there so that they're not doing it. But I agree. It'd be better, more optimal, even if in the long term you had another IGL. But I think this team goes from being, maybe they can make top 10 to, they're dangerous again if you just have an AWPer. Even if they are playing a little more like less structured or less tactically perfect Counter-Strike, they don't have as clear a game plan, it'd still be a very dangerous roster if they had that bloody AWPer, which they currently do not. But let's talk about underdogs, because ENCE, as I was talking about my last favourite, their opening matchup is against a team, well, you think you're clearly winning this opening matchup, and you've picked this team for, well, I'll let you explain your reasons, because I don't understand them.
Imperial. I love them. I actually, like, the last encounter they had with Furia, they did lose. But I actually have them pegged as kind of the best team in Brazil right now. Which feels a little strange to think about, because Vinny is not really like a traditional in-game leader. They've also got like a streamer turned player on their team that's like brand new in no way, who has been quite impressive, to be quite honest. But it's been Henny and Phelps that kind of steal the show. Like, Phelps is hitting, albeit this is in domestic competition, and I know it's going to be inflated. But Phelps has been lights out in like his mechanics. Even just watching the games that he's playing, sure, he's playing against lower level opposition, but he's given them almost like no chance to fight back. And Henny's Henny. Like, there's kind of a one of a kind AWPer, and he's doing a lot of damage on this Imperial side. I think calling wise, they actually look quite like surprisingly structured. Like, when I saw Henny and Phelps stealing numbers, I thought like they must be playing like some chaos level Counter-Strike, and they just happened to make it work. There's no way you're getting these numbers otherwise. But they actually, maybe outside of a couple of rounds where they just go for like crazy bursts, they do have like a solid mid-rounding game, and they actually do have depth on this roster as well. Like, Vinny is the worst player on this roster, but he's by far like, he's at such a high level compared to other players in the region. I have Imperial over Furia almost any other day. So it may be a bit of a weird pick for me, but they fall into the underdog category because of their ranking, and I can't put Furia in the underdog category. I might have picked them too, because I actually think both these Brazilian teams might make it out of this stage.
Oh heavens, please no. Yeah, for me, Imperial are just an unpickable roster. I look at the composition, I look at who's calling, I think, wow, Viberstrike is great in theory, but outside of Brazil, I don't see it working. And I looked at who they played. I didn't watch these games because the Americas RMR. I was going to focus on Liquid and Complexity, and that's about it. But I see, yeah, they They lost to Fluxo. They've lost to Furia, to Bestia in the last month and a half, if that. They came to Europe and lost to Monty, but like whatever. The team's just flying in the next day playing a game online isn't the end of the world. But these sorts of games already don't fill me with much confidence. And their numbers look impossible in terms of their individual ratings on this roster. So I can't really believe it. I'm going to take your word for it. They're playing a structured game. I find it very hard to believe. But I just don't see it working. It'd be nice if we had another team in Brazil to maybe, light fire under Furia's ass and maybe force them to make some needed changes. That'd be a very nice surprise. But I struggle to see how this team's supposed to be realistically good.
I'll put it this way: like Legacy and Imperial, in terms of like nameplate value, the players are actually very similarly ranked. I would say, if you had to put like a ranking head to head between the two rosters, but Imperial are like 10 times the team that Legacy are. Which is strange because I feel like Legacy almost have like the better prospects, but not the better players, if that makes sense. Like at the level they are currently, like maybe in a few years you'll see like Barton Lato and Barton Lato and Dumao actually like on a better roster and maybe even join Fury at some point. I don't know. But right now that Legacy team is like my easiest 0-3.
Oh, without hesitation.
Aside from maybe Pain, and both those teams also had very questionable runs, but there's a lot of questionable teams in the Americas RMR. So
yeah, the level over there is horrendous, and
the seeding wasn't great. So
was so trash.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to bitterly argue with people about this. Like a number of people who blame Swiss systems just over and over again, as if that GSL does not fix these issues. I made the examples. GSL does not fix the crappy seeding.
Yeah, shit goes in, shit comes out. That's how that works.
Literally.
The seed does matter.
So yeah, that was a joke of an event by itself. But no, I'd love to see it, honestly. If Imperial make it through, that'd be awesome. Especially if they make it through and Fury doesn't. That'd be hilarious. So please do. But I struggle to understand how that's supposed to work. A team I very much understand, though, is a team we've seen come to events over and over again over the last, 2 years, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Mongolz, and they've done it with a variety of... it's been this core doing it with a variety of different players surrounding them. And that core basically just being Blitz, Techno, and Mara, the coach. And they've pretty much changed everyone else out at some point, and yet still play a very high level of Counter-Strike, still win games, still upset people, and still make deep runs. And yet still I see people putting them 0-3 in these sorts of events, or not having them picked to go through. I have them picked 3-0. I think their opening matchup against Eternal Fire is the ultimate decision there. Like, whoever wins that one probably goes 3-0. And I think Mongolz win it, because I just love Blitz as a player. Like, he frags hard, he calls solid, he gets the most out of anyone. Like, pick a 17-year-old from Mongolia. He can probably get them into the main stage of an S-tier event. It's actually crazy. So I think there's no reason not to pick this team. The fact that they're an underdog is amazing. That's just sensational. I love this HLTV ranking right now, just for giving me that layup. The players I surrounded themselves with, I was a bit iffy on some of them initially, like Mzinho and 910 especially. But I picked Mzinho in a fantasy, stuck the booster headshot, and he got me 40 points. So now he's my favourite player, because he costs nothing. And then 910 has actually been really solid on the AWP. He's actually a player I've watched POV. He's really solid. He's not as explosive as I've seen. They previously had Annihilation on the team. Mm-hmm. I've seen Annihilation peak higher, but I've also seen Annihilation hit troughs that are almost incomparable to any other player. So it's really good that they've got a steady presence on the AWP. But the big name signing, I think, out of this latest iteration of the team is Senzu. That guy can frag. That guy can do it at LAN as well. We've seen that a couple times now. He can actually frag out and keep up with the best of the best. And the fact that Techno has just come along through all these changes. Blitz's youngest guy at one point on the team was Techno 4K, a guy who hit lots of headshots, was really skilled, but you didn't really think too much of it. His playstyle was simple. But guess what? He must be an absolute soldier off the server. He must listen to everything, attend every prac, and execute exactly what the game plan needs from him, because he's made it through every single rebuild they've had to do. and he's kept on getting slightly and slightly better, just more solid, fundamentally sound, and he can still hit the headshots. So I'm loving this roster. I'll always pick them when I've got the chance. And here we are. Mongolz, I've got them 3-0.
Yeah, I think we might have mentioned Senzu one of the times, like at the previous RMR, when we might have brought up like Yami, like talking about like prospects in the Mongolian scene, because these are just like young players that are just like super fun to watch. I do think people are like overinflating the Mongols currently, because they had obviously quite a staggering performance at Kato, and I think it took a lot of people off guard, especially Senzu's individual performance. But I will say people shouldn't get this twisted. Senzu had a life tournament. Like, that is the best I've ever seen him play ever, actually. Considering the level of opposition, the stage, change of environment, all of that. There are so many different ways in which it should have gone wrong for him, but he did better than expected. There have been so many times, like domestically, when he's playing. Sure, he's putting up some solid numbers, but you can see him have some terrible games. Like, legitimately worse than, like, Mazinho has some pretty poor stats for this team when they play. Senzu can be worse than that. And I think that's why people sort of rate them so highly. I do think at their peak, they can, and maybe even should, make it like 3-0 or 3-1 out of this RMR, because they definitely have the skill to do it. 9-10 is an interesting conversation, because I feel like he's almost a weird combination of the previous Allpers that they've qualified to the majors with. Like, 9 was maybe too passive, Annihilation maybe too explosive, and 9-10 does sort of fill in the middle, where like he does actually still have some of those rounds where he goes kind of ham, but I think more often than not will be a little bit more on the passive end. But he does his role. He like performs excellently at it as well. So I do like the moves that they've made, but yeah, I do think all credit is just like Blitz and Mara, because they call so much better than everybody else in the Asian scene. Hell, even better than some of the European squads. And I know Blitz can speak some English, but I can tell he also doesn't want. I can tell he doesn't want to do that. Like I think he's happy being basically the front man of the Mongolz. I don't know if it's. I don't actually know like the structural back end of it. Like, I know the Mongolz are owned by somebody, but I don't know what kind of like investment the players have in the Mongolz organization, because I'm sure it's probably some like cohabilitation, like we built this together type stick. But he is the godfather of Mongolian Counter-Strike right now. I guess you'd maybe even say Mara is, because they could have even made it to a major when Mara was still a player, or like sort of way back in like 2016 or something, with like IM Taipei. I think it was.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, shout out to them. They play a great tactical game. I do think they have the skill in this roster, but there is a world where they either go 3-1 or they go 1-3. They've never attended a major since the Mongols have been able to qualify. Like, a Mongolian team at the majors has never gone 0-3.
No, they never have. That's a guarantee. They're not going to be 0-3. People need to wake up to that fact. One thing that is pretty interesting is it actually comes back to that conversation we briefly had earlier, or that I brought up, the idea of judging IGL's coaches on a variety of like rosters. They've managed to do it without ever separating from each other, but they've taken so many different players to majors, so many different players to Katowices or whatever it's been. Even though a lot of the time I do think, you just needed to beat that one Chinese team and we'd have seen you at another big event.
They're just like the fathers bringing everybody on like a school trip or something. I don't really understand it. They're just, and like,
if you misbehave, you're cut.
Yeah. Do you guys want to go to the major? You listen to me, and we'll get there. And that's the only promise you have to make before signing up to the Mongols, clearly.
You want to whine again? Oh, do you want to go play with the Huns instead? Do you want to go play whatever event they're playing in?
I've heard ATOX are pretty good. Yeah, you go to ATOX. Yeah,
you can play with them. Yeah, the best behaved kids in Mongolia get to join them on their road to the major. It's a great story, and I'm seeing the 3-0. For once, please let my dreams come true. For once. This one's reasonable. But second underdog, let's hear it. What have you got?
So, speaking of potentially 0-3 teams, I did actually pick Lynn Vision. Now, some people are going to put them in the 0-3 category. I get it. Listen, they're a brand new squad. They're all very young. They are Chinese underdogs and have been for quite some time. But these guys play like legit Counter-Strike. And one, I'm personally extremely elated that they're even at this major,
Oh, yeah.
because they've been trying to get to LAN events for a while, and then like at the end of last year they attended a few, didn't do too hot, but as a young squad you really just want the experience and to test your mettle in that kind of environment. Now they're going to be back in another studio for this opening stage. I think the Slim Vision team are going to overperform versus some of those previous LAN environments. I do think the field is a little bit wishy-washy, but they're not going to be an 0-3 team for me. Like they're going to play one of these Brazilian squads like Pain or Legacy in the 0-2 game, maybe, and they're probably going to destroy them, I think. So I do like this team just simply because they've undergone like roster moves, role swaps, in-game leader shifts, all sorts, and this is finally the solution that works. And they've kept it completely out of like pulling in experienced players or veterans of the Chinese scene to do it. Like they've done it all organically by themselves. And they had like Vadim as their coach, which is like, I guess technically outside of the Chinese scene, fine, whatever. But those Europeans or Russian players that go over to go over into China don't always have like as much input as you'd maybe expect, because there is still a language barrier.
Oh,
Then
massive, yeah.
it can be quite challenging. But Vadim was in the Asian scene for a while. But they've done it now without Expert, without Vadim. Now it's just like all the youngsters, which is kind of what Tyloo are now trying to do, weirdly. So
Yeah.
they're almost trying to copy the archetype. Like, oh, you did it with all young dudes. We'll do that. Yeah, that's perfect. You're onto something. Kaze, Advent, get the Ultimate, get the fuck out.
Important to note that they did kind of take advantage of that loophole, that sort of gap that opened up when Tyloo decided to fuck their own roster up, because they stole the Rare Atom group, then started making changes that made no sense to people outside of the Chinese scene, and then their level went down, which again to me wasn't surprising, but it seemed to be a shock to them, obviously, because they then immediately brought Musea back after not making this major. So a bit of a weird one. Beating Greyhound, according to Asian scene experts, basically came down to that nuke decider going through. Like the veto was screwed up by Greyhound. They made a mistake letting that map happen. I'm no expert on that area, but it was a really great match to watch. It's one of the few matches from the Age of Armor I could actually get to see. Because most of the games started at like 2 a.m. and no offense, my job is more important than
that's when we had to wake
Asian
up.
CS.
So.
Yeah, but you were getting paid to cast it. It was a bit different.
That's true. Yeah,
a bit different. I was getting paid to do my own job at 9 a.m. so I wasn't going to do that. But no, it was one of the better games, because the only other game I managed to catch was the mini ISA roster playing against not the good Australian team that arrived on, someone else who were terrible. It was not a fun game at all. It was some of the worst Counter-Strike I think I've watched all year. So
yeah, I mean, there definitely wasn't another Australian team, because Australia only got one slot.
It was them versus someone really crap in the end.
It could have been Twisted Minds GG How.
Oh, that was it. It was the Battle of the Middle East.
Deos, Deos and versus Issa and like Doc and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, GG How versus Twisted Minds. That was such a bad game. I mean, everyone involved should really be like ashamed. I guess it was nice to see Mini as a talent, like, so I hadn't really gone to watch him much. But yeah, that was a horrible game of Counter-Strike.
I am glad you bring up, shameful displays at the RMR, because I think it's one of your last picks, in fact, that had a shameful display in some of their games and was probably the worst Counter-Strike that anybody had seen at the European RMR.
You couldn't possibly be talking about Guild Eagles.
No, I'm not talking about Guild Eagles, but...
Oh, NIP! I didn't go back far enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was horrific. That's not a laughing matter. I take great shame and almost killed myself over that, and that was horrific to watch. But no, this was worse. Anyone who had the misfortune of tuning into that game, I feel sorry for you. I empathise. It was so dog shit. But let's talk about my final underdog pick, who I know will not be playing dog shit CS. Well, actually, no, they might. It was AMKAL. they did actually ended up they went through, but in a slightly disappointing way, which I think is impressive to make it to the major and have me look at you and go, "Ooh, that was a bit ugly. That was a bit grim," because they played the worst game of the RMRA, which was their double or triple overtime game with NIP, a best of one. That was criminal, just criminal. No one had any right to win that.
If you didn't like Overpass before, you would hate Overpass more after watching that.
Certainly would. But they did go on to beat Falcons, beat Nine Pandas. Neither of those games particularly aesthetic, but at least it was done. And there's things to like about the roster. They've gelled well. It's a team of players playing this in their own language. There's reasons to like them. I think they've got a good chance of making it through here. They are the weakest pick that I've made, I think. I think both me and you can agree that our second underdog picks usually aren't exactly home runs. And yeah, I like certain players on this team. I think Icy's got a lot of potential. The rifle core's solid. Let's see if they can make it through by hook or by crook again. I don't care if it's ugly. Get me some points.
Yeah, I can't remember if I picked AMKAL to make it out of the RMR. I feel like I did.
You did. That's where you pull up the point difference. That's why we're now on the same amount of points.
Oh, I see. I didn't realize we were tied. But yeah, AMKAL, I tried to make the argument for them before, and that was back when I watched them in some of their online games, and then I looked at that RMR, and my confidence, it did really take a hit.
Yeah, you regretted that.
Yeah, I was like, that was a really poor pick for me, but they still made it through, so I'll take the points. Listen, I do think they have a good ceiling, but their floor is bad, and even their middle is bad. It's like I don't know what voodoo you have to do behind the scenes to get to that ceiling, because it does feel like when they're thriving, they're just kind of just like taking fights and forcing duels a lot, and and sometimes they get super punished for it, and it looks terrible, and then sometimes they just kill everybody on their screen all of the time, and I don't think it matters who they're against in that capacity. I do think it's just like an individual form check for these guys, because they're sort of building into those fights, okay, but then they just hang around for way too long always. Even if they have an advantage, they're always trying to push limits and keep aggressing, and I just hope that they're able to add some kind of level back coming into this major, because I don't have confidence in them. I'm surprised that you do. I would have picked. Maybe Nine Pandas are too high ranked.
I was coin flipping between them and.
Nine Pandas are technically a favorite, so.
I was actually my coin flip was between them and Ecstatic pretty much. Like I was trying to convince myself of either one, and Ecstatic's like, ooh, the Danish 5-stack who play like really correct Counter-Strike but have zero studs that I actually care about, or the team with that All-Pri like and the Rifle Corps who sure just fight people, but they do it pretty well. Like that's kind of my coin flip, and I was like, when it comes down to it in the pressure moments, what do I want to rely on? Comms and strategy or headshots? I picked headshots. I usually pick headshots. When it comes to that coin flip, I usually pick headshots. So I went with headshots, but no, it's not as I said, it's not a home run pick. I don't think I'm guaranteed a point here. I just think they've done it ugly in the past. They can do it ugly again. That's kind of it. Okay, I think an ugly, nasty Counter-Strike. Like you win triple overtime, bunch of raw aim duels, disgusting, but it worked.
It may not be pretty, but we're all not going to be pretty together.
Exactly. United as one, ugly, but victorious.
Yeah. I like the players on this roster. It's just watching their Counter-Strike can be
painful at times.
I'd suggest doing something else while you're watching an AMKAL game, just so you're only catching the good moments or like the high intensity moments and not all the nonsense in between.
Yeah, not all the rounds they completely flop. But let's talk about, just quickly, just to wrap this up, because we made our picks now, some of the teams who are bigger names than the underdogs that we haven't picked. I said that as I looked at the list and thought, wow, there's no one I actually really want to... Let's actually, you know what? Screw it. We didn't talk about them. They're in the favourites section. We didn't talk about them really at all. Furia. They're here.
Yeah. They look good at the Americas RMR as well. Every game, pretty one-sided.
They won. I didn't think they looked good, but they did win. Like, I remember after the Nouns game, I had a conversation with viewers of the channel will know Quack, and you may have seen him pop up somewhere every now and then, but we had a conversation about both Furia and Liquid won their opening best of ones, and both of them did it in such a terrible way, like the way they played, that we actually kind of thought Neither one was going to make it through. It was that gross. They did end up going through though. Furia 3-0. They played a piss poor complexity, I thought, in that best of three to make it out. It was literally Elige versus 5 Brazilians, and unfortunately that was a step too far for him.
Yeah.
But I don't.
I casted that game, so I don't know that much.
You know it, and you saw the full detail.
You're just like, where are Grim and Floppy? Where are they?
Where is this Floppy? Everyone keeps telling me is so good. Where is he? This would be a great time for him to show up. But as I've gotten used to, he didn't. So I'm just not vibing with Furia. As I said before, I would like this to be a kick in the arse. If they don't make it out, Imperial do. They have to look at this roster because I still don't think Fallen should be on a team at this level. I still think the fact that they haven't gone out and signed Big Uzera is an indictment on their recruitment. That would have been one of the moves to make them good. And if Imperial can make it out with Henny, take that sticker money, buy 2 players. Like, is all I'm saying. Like, that should be the way.
Yeah, I think I did share a little of your concern. Like, I think Furia, I contest. I do think Furia did look good, but only because they were very clear about what they wanted to do at the start of rounds and did it. And
Sure.
usually came out ahead in those engagements. It's actually like the late round macro and sort of mid round that felt very iffy for me. Even in that Nouns game, like I think without Yuri like popping off on CT side, they probably maybe even lose that opening best of one because Yuri was honest, like they just couldn't kill him. And even in the complexity game, yeah, it did feel like there was almost a bit of a skill gap, but I think Furia were making them actually kind of forcing some uncomfortable fights that complexity just weren't ready for. Because if you look at some of the Furia's games before that RMR, they were way shakier in like their openings looked bad, their mid rounds looked bad, and sometimes actually their late rounds looked okay, acceptable. But it feels like they've shifted their focus into their starts and just making sure that everyone's like focused on what they have to do at the start of a round. That it's kind of worked for them here. So I maybe don't share the same concerns. I actually think they make it out of the stage, but they're not a championship level team. And I do agree that like, what's the point of Fallen if he's not calling and AWPing, and now he's just AWPing, and we're back to old Furia where the calling is still like so
an issue.
Yeah. And there's probably a little bit of intercommunication. Like there might even just be like some co-calling, co-leadership, but we've not seen any roster succeed at doing that really. So
no, it's not something I'd call ideal. So yeah, for me the solution's been clear for a long time though. It's been get Big Uzera in and get an AWPer. If it means bringing back Henny, sure, why not? This seems like the best time to actually have him back. He's on one hell of a heater.
Not attached to Lucas anymore either, so
yeah, they finally what's it? Siamese twins have been separated after all these years.
They got the surgery done.
Yeah, it's a miracle. Oh. But no, that's kind of the Furia thing of it. I don't know. I don't really want to elaborate much on those other underdog teams. I think we're good at that point.
We didn't talk about Apex, weirdly.
Oh, that's true. That's fair enough. They do need to be talked about. They really do.
Yeah. Because I actually think Apex have been playing some pretty solid Counter-Strike and almost like... I don't want to say inexplicable. I almost don't want to say that.
I'll say it. I don't get it.
It doesn't feel as inexplicable because I feel like when Apex removed Stico, they like lost all their identity about like how they wanted to play Counter-Strike. They lost their like front man as well. Like it didn't feel like there was much personality behind Apex anymore. But now that he's back, Stico's been playing pretty damn well, to be quite honest, after his hiatus. And Sense is in-game leading, from my understanding, and he's like very inexperienced at doing so. But he's got like he's got some solid veterans around him that if there's ever a moment of like self-doubt or like lack of ideas, Stico will come with a goal. Jacob, I'm sure, will have something to say. You know, these are guys that have been around the circuit long enough in so many different teams. And also, Stico is quite an articulate, analytical dude that even if you don't fully believe in the call, you can understand the methodology behind it, and you could always kind of throw yourself in there with his idea. So yeah, the team is kind of functioning weirdly above the level that I would expect, especially like I thought Sasanita basically needed a fellow North Macedonian on his squad to lead him, because when he first joined he wasn't great, but then when Kixon joined it was like, oh my god, this works. And he's still kind of maintained a bit of a level, at least.
I still have issues with the Sassanito of it all, and that was what I was going to bring up. As a reason not to pick them is that, firstly, this team is desperately Jacob reliant. Like, Jacob, he's like 30, dude. Like, why is he the guy who's having to put this team in a rucksack? Like, I get he's a big, strong dude, but like, come on. It's metaphors, like, not literal. He shouldn't have to do the carrying. So, if he's not, brute forcing rounds open and winning, basically getting multi-frags left, right, and centre, I don't see much of this team winning. Nork can close out some rounds, can get some good picks. He's a really good AWPer at this point. But Sassanito just needs to move the needle a little more. He needs to step up. He needs to do something, because his overall level hasn't been high enough for them to really maintain this. And we've seen it in the past. There's only so far they can get, and especially with the downgrading coach, at least so far, the way it's felt, like the coach-IDO combo hasn't been really vibing as much. I think they're a limited team. So if Jacob can backpack them and Nork has some pop-off rounds, sure, they can be a 3-2 team, but I struggle to see them consistently winning games at this event.
I gotta say though, I mean the two Norwegians we have in like the top levels of Counter-Strike in Rain and Jacob, they just so solid and still pushing age but still hitting heads. So I think personally they should be celebrated.
I think whatever the hell they're eating is keeping them going, because there must be something special in the food out there. And I noticed that little reference. Don't worry. They do need to be celebrated. It's impressive what they've done. They've basically taken the age-old argument, the father time of it all, and just shat on it. Really, they just gone, no, you can be 30.
That's why the Nords are so. That's why the Nords are so like muscular and big. There is something just better about their food or their air or something. Get Zaiwu over there for like 2 years, and the air quality will improve him, I'm sure.
Yeah, air quality, some real food. You can't go to McDonald's all the time. I'm sure they don't have as many of them. I know they have them, but not as many.
May not be as dripped out in Gucci or whatever he did that brand placement for. So.
Oh God, yeah. A little bit of elk, that'll sort him out. Some elk and some cold weather and some weights. I think that's the combination that'll make Zaiwu the GOAT. Truly the GOAT. He'll be #1 for 5 years straight on that diet and regimen. But yeah, that should wrap up the opening stage of the major. Not the major qualifier, not the real major, but the opening stage of the major. Wow. Look how much more fun things are when you put random qualifiers in front of them. But yeah, I've been KingT, he's been YouM3. Those are our picks. Look out for the polls where I'm going to ask you your thoughts. You're probably going to do better than us because you don't actually have to compete for the picks, which is a very handy privilege when it comes to this sort of endeavour. And yeah, we'll see you hopefully, for the elimination stage.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Because I know I'm buggering off to Copenhagen to actually watch the finals. But before
I'm trying, but I haven't got tickets and things booked, so I don't know yet.
But at least before then, we'll be able to do the second stage of the major, hopefully. So yeah, we'll see you all in that. And yeah, goodbye.